Thomas Jefferson evaluated the character of George Washington in an 1814 letter to a Dr. Walter Jones. He said, "I think I knew General Washington intimately and thoroughly, and were I called on to delineate his character, it should be in terms like these." And he went on in the letter to comment on Washington's strengths and weaknesses, and he didn't spare anything on the weaknesses. But then he turned to speak about his character. He was incapable of fear, meeting personal dangers with the calmest unconcern. Perhaps the strongest feature in his character was prudence, never acting until every circumstance, every consideration was maturely weighed, refraining if he saw a doubt, but when once he decided, going through with his purpose whatever obstacles opposed. His integrity was most pure, his justice the most inflexible I have ever known. No motives of interest or consanguinity or friendship or hatred being able to bias his decision. He was indeed, in every sense of the words, a wise, a good, and a great man. Washington was a man of few words, a great man, a great leader, and our country owes him a great deal. But he didn't leave us any books on leadership. He didn't tell us how he made those decisions, what brought him to that place. For that, I want us to look to what Jesus says in Luke chapter 6. Jesus is going to give us 3 axioms, proverbs, aphorisms of leadership that will guide us. How can we apply these 3 axioms of leadership? Now, Jesus is speaking in Luke chapter 6, and we're beginning in verse 39. He's speaking to his disciples. In verse 20, it tells us that though there was a great crowd around him, and people were being healed, they just walked up into his presence, and they got well. They were thronging to hear what he had to say. But it tells us in verse 20 that he turned his face to his disciples and spoke specifically to them. The apostles and the disciples gathered closest to him. And he continues in that way in our passage this morning. In verse 40, he says, "A pupil is not above his teacher." The word pupil can also be translated disciple. Jesus expects his disciples, you and I, to be people of influence, to be leaders. Recently, and I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but Xi Jinping, the head of the Communist Party in China, secured his leadership without a single vote. He will now be the longest, most powerful ruler ever in China. Nobody had a say in that. We live in a democratic society where we get to choose. We get to have a say. Now, while we choose, we don't always get our choices, do we? But the criteria we use for understanding and evaluating leadership in ourselves and in those whom we choose is critical. And Jesus gives us that kind of criteria in these axioms of leadership. The first axiom is the axiom of model. Verses 39 and 40, if you have your Bible. "And he also spoke a parable to them. A blind man cannot guide a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? A pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone, after he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher." Essentially, you become like the one you watch. You become like that person. You grow up into that. Verse 39 is stated as a question. A blind man cannot lead a blind man, can he? But Jesus states it as an axiom or a principle in Matthew 15:14, where he simply says, if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into a pit. But here he uses it as a rhetorical question. He's expecting you and I, as his disciples, to answer that question. If a blind man leads a blind man, or can a blind man lead a blind man? And what do we say? No, absolutely not. Will they fall into a pit? What do we say? Of course they will. The word for pit is not, as you might think, a gravel pit, a tar pit, anything like that. It's actually a word better understood by his hearers as a ditch. So you get the picture of going down a road, and if you're following the wrong model, a blind model, you're going to go off the road and into the ditch. That's the picture he's giving them. That will always happen. He says real training takes place by emulation. Today we put a lot of credibility on data. And if we hold a course, I teach, or you teach, and I get a bunch of data that I can use. That's called education. Or perhaps you learn a skill that you may be able to use. You get a certificate that says, here you go. But Jesus says, no, real education, real training comes when you learn to emulate the teacher. Learn to be like the teacher. And Jesus is saying that the result of that is holistic. It's not just more head knowledge or more ability to do something. It's a change in person. I think it's interesting that when Jesus asks these questions, he seems to be presuming Murphy's Law before Murphy wrote it. You know, Murphy's Law says whatever can go wrong will go wrong. I'll tell you, if there's a ditch nearby, the blind will lead the blind into it. You can count on it. But the point is, we are who we model. And as disciples of Jesus, we model ourselves after Jesus. John Quincy Adams once said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, become more, you are a leader. But more of what? See, it depends on who your model is. That's what you'll become. And Jesus should be our model. We can apply this axiom to ourselves very easily. Jesus says the pupil will become like the teacher. That's the goal for us, to become like Jesus, to be conformed to his image. Takes us back to God's intent in creation. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God creates Adam and Eve, and he says, let us make them in our likeness. Our likeness. God intends for us to be that way. He doesn't want us to just know more, do more, or any of those things, but be as he intended. And that comes when we follow Jesus, when we model ourselves after Jesus. Likeness to Jesus as our model. Oh, but that process doesn't happen instantly. It takes time. Doesn't Jesus say, will become like? So you're in that process, right? I'm in that process. It's never fully realized. It's never fully over with. It's a constant thing of always looking, where, Jesus, do I go? How do I follow you? What should I do at this time? In fact, that's one of the reasons I hope you're here today. You want to get a fresh view of Jesus. See how you may follow him more closely, more faithfully, so that as you go through the next week facing every decision, relationship issue, health or financial crisis, asking yourself, who is my model and what would he have me do? But it also applies to our choices of leadership. As members of a democratic society where we vote for leaders politically, even in the church and decisions, it's important for us to be able to say, what model? We need to look at the choice of leadership asking, who is the model of this person that aspires to be a leader? Where do they get their direction? Secondly, how much time and effort do they put into actually trying to follow this leader? It's always interesting to me that every time there's a national election, people running for office pull out their Bible, dust it off and say, see? How much time have they really put in? And then finally, when they say, this is my model, do they actually follow that model? Is it exhibited in the way they behave, in the choices they make? John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic president of the United States. When he was running for office, I remember the debate Many Protestant voters were very, very concerned that this John F. Kennedy might have a higher allegiance to the Pope and the Vatican than he did to this country. Now, I didn't know that because I was voting, but my dad favored Kennedy, and my mother and my grandmother favored Nixon for that reason. The irony is that today we also have a Catholic president, and many conservative Protestant voters would wish he would follow Vatican teaching more fully. How closely does one follow a model? They can declare this to be their model, but how closely? How closely do you and I follow the model of Jesus Christ? That's the challenge. He would have us be leaders and influencers. In fact, we are all commissioned to one particular task. No matter who you are, if you're a follower of Christ, you're commissioned to lead others to Jesus. And the certification for that doesn't come because you took an evangelism class. It doesn't happen because you have wonderful material that somebody gave you. The certification for that comes from how closely you followed Jesus, how clearly you showed the path for him. First axiom is model. Second axiom is vision, found in verses 41 and 42. And why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, brother, let me take out the speck that is in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Vision. What do we look closely at? What are we aware of? Now, Jesus gets very personal at this point. He changes from an objective statement about blind and leading the blind and teachers and pupils to saying you. And this, by the way, is you singular, not you plural. This means you and you and you. And by the way, 3 fingers are pointing back at me. He's asking each of us to answer the question. And he's bringing up a commonly understood problem. We are all keenly aware of the faults of others and blissfully ignorant of our own. When Jesus talks about the log in our eye, he's talking about what clouds or is not visible in your vision. You're looking beyond it to see the speck in your brother's eye. You're ignoring it. The word he uses for log is interesting because the people in those days would not have understood it to be a log that falls across your driveway or blocks a trail, as we see around here quite often. It's rather a piece of wood, still rough in its log shape, but fitted to be a support in a house. That's why some versions translate beam instead of log, because that's where it would go. So what he's saying is, the problem is that you see the speck, the little problem with somebody else, but you don't notice that you've built into the structure of your life this sin. You don't look up to see it. Jesus is clearly pointing fingers here. He grants that it's right for us to enter into what we will call mutual correction. We ought to be saying, brother and sister, how are you doing? And be open to correction ourselves. That's good. But we must first, and this is key, first question our own lives. Give the self-examination priority. In the order of things, start there. Paul raised this question with the believers in Rome. The church at Rome was composed of 2 groups. Jewish believers, we would call them Messianic Jews today, that had come out of Judaism to accept Christ as their Messiah, and then pagan believers, those who had come out of pagan religion. They had 2 different backgrounds. Paul turns his attention toward the Jewish believers when he writes in Romans 2:17, But if you bear the name Jew and rely upon the law and boast in God and know his will and approve the things that are essential, being instructed out of the law, and are confident that you are yourself a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, a corrector of the foolish, a teacher of the immature, having the law as the embodiment of knowledge and of the truth. See, that's what they would be saying. We have all that heritage. We know all that. You all need to listen to us. We've got it down. Then he turns and he says, you therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who preach that one should not steal, do you steal? You who say that one should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, through breaking the law, do you dishonor God? First, examine yourself. First, look to yourself. You know, if Jesus had to say this to the disciples and the apostles who were right there in front of him, if they had a problem with it, if Paul had to write to those first century believers who had left that society that they were caught up in and come to Christ, even under persecution, if they had the problem, how much more you and I? How much more you and I? We can apply this to ourselves easily. Please notice how severe Jesus gets with us. You hypocrites. He reserves those words for Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, lawyers. But here, and here alone, he points the finger at his own disciples. He's saying that the condition for influence, if you're going to be leaders, if you're going to have influence on people, the condition is self-examination. That's why Jesus never states this axiom in a declaration or a declarative sentence. He always makes it a question because he wants each of us to start immediately evaluating ourselves. That's why he makes it a question. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye? And look, notice verse 41. And why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye? When he says look, it's the word to simply see. You know, adjust your glasses and look and see that person's problem. But then in verse 41 he says, but do not notice the log that is in your own. This is a word that means to know well, to compare it, to look at it for what it really is, to understand it, to be honest about it. That's the kind of look we need to take. We need to regard our sins as more serious than the sins of others. I like the King James. It says, why you look at the mote in your brother's eye. Now, a mite is small, right? A mote is smaller. That's how infinitesimal your brother's sins are compared to your own. Look at your own. Don't regard theirs as serious, but definitely take yours seriously. I have a leak in my roof. So I had a roofer come over to take a look at it. And the roofer is up on the roof with me, and he's standing there, and he's doing this. He's pushing up and down, and the old roof is flexing up and down. And he says, uh-oh, you have a soft spot. I have a what? A soft spot. Something is badly wrong right here. Now, folks, I live blissfully with that soft spot. It doesn't bother. Yeah, the roof leaks, and I put out a towel, collect a few drops, but onward I go, you know. It's okay. I mean, every night I sit down right under that spot, and I eat snacks and watch TV. In the morning I get up, I open my Bible, and I have my prayer time right under that spot. Completely unaware. We need to take a look at our own lives and know when we need to put a new roof on, when we need to examine those besetting sins, the ones we built into the structure of our lives in such a way that we live without noticing them. As a practice, we need to practice confession before correction, self-examination before correction. The first axiom was model. The second axiom is vision. And we can apply that to leadership. As we look at those who aspire to leadership, It's important, I think, for us to look for those who will admit weakness, who are ready to say where they fail, where they don't know, what they don't understand. Look for those who recognize the help they have received and recognize those who have helped them. Look for those who always ask questions before they propose answers or attack others. Political campaigns follow a predictable course, don't they? Early on, they all say, we're going to run a clean campaign here, right? No backbiting, no attacking. A little bit later in the campaign, after talking about issues, they then begin to attack one another's record. Well, yeah, but in the past they did this, or they said that, or they voted this way. And then a little later in the campaign, as the race continues on, someone from a committee for the election of, fill in the blank, will all of a sudden begin attacking the opponent, won't they? And then as it gets down to the last week or so, the candidates themselves just spew out vitriol and hatred toward one another. And then there's the election. One wins, one loses. The primary is over. They're good buddies in the campaign for one another. Go figure. Wouldn't it be refreshing to find leaders who don't fall into these usual patterns? But this won't change unless we change, unless we learn to follow Jesus with this kind of self-evaluation. Looking at our own lives, seeking to be those who are changed into the image of Christ before we seek to change others. Before being the moral correctors of the world, which is a good thing. God places His church in this world just for that purpose. But before we do that, we must be confessors and correctors of ourselves. This is the means of influence in this world. The Apostle Paul, in 2 Corinthians 12:9, said this was his means of influence. He wrote in 12:9, and He, that is Jesus, has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. To expose your own weakness is the means to influence. I know it's counterintuitive, but it's Jesus' way. Third axiom is fruit. Fruit. It's in verses 43 through 45. For there is no good tree which produces bad fruit, nor on the other hand, a bad tree which produces good fruit. For each tree is known by its fruit. For men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they pick grapes from a briar bush. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills the heart. Fruit. Jesus is actually encouraging us to take a look at the fruit that others produce and that we produce. Because by that we can know the inner person. The statement, the axiom, or the proverb is this phrase, is known by its fruit. The inner source will produce either rot or sweetness. Either one depends upon the inner source. And they'll always match. You don't pick a fig from a thorn bush. If you try, it's injury. And you don't pick a grape from a briar. By the way, the word for gathering the grapes here means to gather in bundles or clusters as you would harvest grapes. He's referring to looking at a sample, a larger sample of the fruit. We had a plum tree in our yard at one house we lived in. It produced abundant plums, but they were all small and very, very tart. Now, when Cindy cooked it up with a lot of sugar, good jam. But the reason for that was the center of the tree was rotting. And it continued to rot the whole time we lived there. It's gone today. You see, what's on the inside will display itself through the fruit that is produced. The quality of the interior will be the quality of the exterior. We can apply this to ourselves. Jesus does it for us in verse 45. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, for his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. He talks about good fruit, and he means fruit that is fitting, sweet, right, all that kind of thing. But here he uses a different word for good, the good that is intrinsically good and beneficial, morally good, that approaches the goodness of God. And what he's saying is that you treasure the good and then you produce the good. It's a process. You have to treasure first and you produce second. The evil man just naturally is going to produce what? He doesn't treasure anything and he produces evil or wickedness. But you and I must treasure. The Apostle Paul, again, writing to the Philippians in Philippians chapter 4, says this: finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence, and if anything worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. Those are the things you treasure. You think about them. You put your mind on them. You find sources for them. You concentrate on them. And of course, God's Word is a great place. He goes on to say, the things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Treasure those things. Learn them. Follow the models that demonstrate those things. Look for them wherever you go, and then put them to practice. And the fruit of peace will be yours. All that can be known by conversation. Your words will reveal what's inside. Every day. That's what will happen. Your words will reveal what's inside. What do you talk about? You ever sat back after an evening with friends and said, what did we discuss tonight? What do you complain about? What do you get excited about? These are the things that reflect what's going on the inside. If we treasure the good on the inside, then we produce good for others. That's the point. Jesus once said, by your words you shall be condemned, and by your words you shall be justified. What are you producing? What are your words like? George Washington was concerned for his troops in the Revolutionary War. In 1776, he wrote a memo. The general is sorry to be informed that the foolish and wicked practice of profane cursing and swearing, a vice heretofore little known in an American army, is growing into fashion. He hopes the officers will, by example as well as influence, endeavor to check it, and that both they and the men will reflect that we can have little hope of the blessing of heaven on our arms if we insult it by our impiety and folly. Added to this, it is a vice so mean and low, without temptation, that every man of sense and character detests and despises it. Your words make a difference. I don't care who you are. I don't care whether you say, well, I'm not in a position of influence. I don't hold any. It's all right. Your words matter, and they will produce life. Again, Paul, writing to the Ephesians in Ephesians chapter 4, carried this out a little further when he said in verse 29, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear. That it may give grace to those who hear. Your words matter. In a coarse and coarsening society in which we live, we need people with good words to influence. We can also apply this to leadership. Don't expect good from bad. That's what Jesus is telling us. You don't get figs from thorn bushes. You know, you probably fall into this temptation. I know I have. Here's a candidate running for office. He agrees with my position on this and that. He's a bum otherwise, but I'll vote for him. No. Only God can bring good from bad, right? The rest of us need to just pursue the good. Look for it where it is and pursue it. Check the words of those who aspire to leadership and not their sound bites. As Jesus said, we gather together the clusters of grapes. So gather the words. Listen to their conversations. Look at their words over time. Look for their models. Who do they follow? Who do they aspire to be like? And do they give credit to that person? And then look for a sense of self-effacement as they present themselves. Finally, remember that bad and different are not the same thing. May be very different from you, but not necessarily bad. Their words matter. In July of 1861, after the defeat of the Union at the Battle of Bull Run, President Lincoln declared a national day of prayer and fasting with these words: "It is fit and becoming in all people at all times to acknowledge and revere the supreme government of God, to bow in humble submission to his chastisement, to confess and deplore their sins and transgressions in the full conviction that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and to pray with all fervency and contrition for the pardon of their past offenses and for the blessing upon their present and prospective action. And whereas, when our own beloved country, once by the blessings of God, united, prosperous, and happy, is now afflicted with faction and civil war, it is peculiarly fit for us to recognize the hand of God in this terrible visitation, and in sorrowful remembrance of our own faults and crimes as a nation and as individuals, to humble ourselves before him and to pray for his mercy, that the inestimable boon of civil and religious liberty, earned under his guidance and blessing by the labors and sufferings of our fathers, may be restored." Do you get a picture of Lincoln's character in that? Do you see what he really aspires to? See where he gets his direction? Words. Words matter. There's a whole industry given to putting out quotes. You know, they're supposed to inspire and direct and motivate and lead us and all that kind of stuff. Good Housekeeping put out a list of top axioms or proverbs or sayings for 2023. Number one on the list: it is often the small steps, not the giant leaps, that bring about the most lasting change. Elizabeth II. That's nice, isn't it? Yeah, that's nice. Number two, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Nelson Mandela. It strikes me that Nelson Mandela was a nonviolent guy, and now he wants to weaponize education. What? And that's the way it goes with most of these kinds of sayings. They're nice, they have some good things in them, but they don't really give me direction. They don't really take me anywhere. I've kind of reacted to this industry of uplifting and motivating. I used to go to despair.com where they parodied these kinds of statements. However, despair.com is no longer on the web. Apparently, despair is so common we don't need a website for it. But at any rate, one of them was this: a journey of 1,000 miles often ends badly. There was a picture on this poster of a grizzly bear and a salmon making the last leap up the falls. Another one: what doesn't kill you only postpones the inevitable. Even in the area of leadership, Leroy Imes, I respect him. A leader is one who sees more than others see, sees farther than others see, and who sees before others see. Okay. Or Rosalind Carter said, a leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. How much better are the sayings of Jesus if we're looking for something to motivate, to guide, to give us direction? These axioms of leadership. Jesus' followers are to be influencers in their world. Christian influencers are first followers of Jesus, making him their model and his word their guide. Secondly, before influencing others, Christ's followers seek to change themselves in regard to their own holiness and righteousness. And finally, the followers of Christ faithfully treasure the good in themselves, that their words might have influence for good in the lives of others. Are you a follower of Jesus today? Would you say he's my model? I hope so. If not, speak with me. Please, I'll linger up here afterwards. Jeff, you'll be in the back room, right? Thank you, Jeff. If you want to talk with somebody about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to make him the model of your life, we'd love to talk to you about that. Are you here today and you're saying, I don't know what to do with this decision? How would Jesus lead me? Again, I'd be happy to talk with you or make an appointment to visit with you. And Jeff will be in the back room to pray with you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you that you've given us your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, to lead us into that likeness you intended for us when you first created us. Lord, thank you that you would use us to influence this world for good. Help us, Lord, to be faithful followers who always look to your model. Help us, Lord, to be careful in our evaluation of our own lives, quick to confess, quick to admit, quick to expose our weaknesses that your power may be displayed. And Lord, help us to treasure the good in our lives that we might share the good with those around us. For we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.